Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Smith, and I am a recent graduate of the Health Services Leadership and Management Master's Program and the Teaching Certificate Program. I'm also a clinical nurse leader graduate. I graduated about 5 years ago from University of Maryland, the Baltimore campus, so I am fairly familiar with your program. I'm also a certified clinical nurse leader and a certified critical care registered nurse. I currently work across the street as a registered nurse in cardiology at University of Maryland Medical Center. So today I am honored and excited to get to talk with all of you about one of my absolute favorite topics, the clinical nurse leader's role in empowering change in healthcare. As each of you know, we are currently living through unprecedented times. I think it's safe to say all of us are experiencing a pandemic of this magnitude for the first time in our lives. And we are learning just how essential quality healthcare and quality nursing care is to the health of our nation. As someone who is just a few years into where all of you are headed, I hope to be able to speak to the amazing opportunities that are just ahead for all of you. Each one of you watching this will, in just a few short months, be able to be in a position to change the lives of patients, their families, and therefore our healthcare system as a whole. In these times specifically, I'd like for you to be thinking about how these topics we discussed today can and will be applied by many in this difficult time. These are the times that leaders emerge, and nurses who are at the front line have the opportunity to create incredible lasting changes. The eyes of the world are on healthcare, and more individuals than ever are listening. Each of you watching this has the opportunity to create positive changes in this system. Now I know that some or maybe all of you in this room are a little uncertain about where your education will take you. I know when I graduated, I had a lot of questions. I questioned, how will being a clinical nurse leader really allow me to change healthcare? And what do I have to offer that is really needed now more than ever before? And I've been really looking forward to this lecture because I want you to know that the answer is you are needed a lot. You are needed in our organizations, and you are definitely needed as strong advocates for these patients. So today we are going to discuss a few very important topics. Because many of you are setting up to take the NCLEX in a short time and hopefully the Clinical Nurse Leader Certification exam as well, this lecture builds on the knowledge that you gained through reading Chapters 7 and 17 in King and Gerard, your Clinical Nurse Leader Certification exam text. And generally this lecture is delivered in person, but it is my hope to make this class as informative and as interactive as possible. The slides and a handout should be available to you so that you can participate and follow along as we go through this presentation. So to give you an outline of how this time will go, we will be talking about what empowering change really means. We'll be talking about change theory for clinical leaders, and we will finish up with a case study. So just to get you thinking, this is a little activity that we usually do in person, and it requires you to dig deeper within yourself and think about how change actually happens through time. I want each of you to think about how you've changed as a person from the beginning of nursing school until this very moment. Another option is to also think about how this pandemic has changed you. I, for one, have been changed by this pandemic because I used to think we had more than enough supplies, more than enough ventilators to suit the needs of our population. And I now know that we are struggling greatly to acquire more resources, specifically ventilators, during this crisis, and quite simply, we don't have enough. So I'd like for you, as long as you're following along and you have that handout, to jot down a few ideas. Take a moment and think of something that you've learned through it all, learned through your nursing school experience, and learned through this pandemic. So now that you're all thinking about how your ideas can change through time and how life changes through time, let's get started on change in healthcare. Many of you are already very familiar and are about to become immersed in an environment of our current healthcare system, which looks a lot like this. It's a highly complex system, and in many ways it's incredibly impressive. But additionally, it's also in absolute chaos, and to put it very lightly, it's messy. Just look at the news, social media, and even more reputable journals and studies. It is clear that lawmakers, change agents, patients and their families, and healthcare workers all over the United States scream for change. Change, though, true, lasting, and beneficial change, that can be difficult to implement. According to Nair and Collins, two nursing researchers mentioned in your CNL text, the CNL is perfectly positioned to empower positive changes at the microsystem level. So I'd like to specifically draw your attention to the dotted lines that appear on this healthcare land image. These are all representative of breaks in microsystems. These breaks in the system are areas where clinical nurse leaders can truly thrive to bridge the gaps that we need to bridge in healthcare and make our macro system a much more beneficial place to be. All right, so today we are specifically going to be covering 3 objectives from your syllabus. Objectives 3, 5, and 6. They are all listed here. We won't read through them, but just so that you know we are following your syllabus and following the objectives that we need to achieve through this course. They are all listed. And they all involve understanding how to improve the quality and safety of the patient care we deliver through positive change. So first, what we're going to do is define what change and empowerment really are. So change is defined by Webster's Dictionary as to make different in some particular way or to make radically different. That's my favorite definition of it. And empowerment means that we are giving official authority. So as clinical nurse leaders, essentially by empowering change, what we are doing is pushing forward, giving authority for others to make something radically different, to push forward positive, different ways of medicine for a better future. So as most of us would agree, there are many areas in medicine where change is needed. As a clinical nurse leader, we learn a lot about effectuating change in our units and within our hospitals through horizontal leadership. As you could tell from the first picture, Healthcare Land, our healthcare system is a macro system, but it is made up of many smaller units that provide frontline healthcare, and that is where we come in. These microsystems, these small frontline units that actually provide the healthcare, are where many of us can thrive, make changes, and it's where many of us will work. So now the information on this slide is built from your text and from the white paper, and this is the good news for us. According to our text, clinical microsystems are the focus for improvement of healthcare for our future, and the clinical nurse leader is a role that changes healthcare for the better. How do they do that? Clinical nurse leaders do that through better resource control and through improved outcomes. Clinical nurse leaders truly are in a prime position to guide and direct these small frontline units that provide hands-on care. So how do we do that as clinical nurse leaders? That's what we're discussing today. So as a clinical nurse leader, you know that you have been trained to utilize research as evidence, to promote patient safety, and to focus on quality improvement measures. Now more than ever, as healthcare continues to grow more complex, we need bedside leaders who are committed to this quality care and are committed to evidence-based practice to push forward new and more positive changes. Okay, so the next 3 slides are questions, and we usually go over all of this together. They are preparation for the CNL certification exam. Feel free to answer them on your own. The answers are provided in the notes section of this PowerPoint. For now, though, we are going to skip ahead to a video that demonstrates what one small change can do. One small change can lead to a very powerful domino effect. Now, unfortunately, with this presenter view and this video, it is sometimes difficult to get this video to play. I have attached a YouTube hyperlink to the end of, or to the bottom of the next slide with the video. If you get to this part of the presentation and only a white screen comes up, my apologies. Please follow the hyperlink at the bottom of the page and review the video before moving on so that you understand what we're talking about as we continue through this lecture. For the purpose of your time, we're going to move on to the next slide. All right, so as was demonstrated through the domino effect video, small changes can make a very large impact. The effect of one domino falling has the ability to affect many others, which is almost a perfect segue into the topic of complexity theory. As stated here, complexity theory is a study of how behaviors of complex systems, like the healthcare system, are organized and how they all affect one another. Essentially, it provides a framework that analyzes how behavioral patterns and organizational structure emerge and evolve as the result of a dynamic web of interactions. So as nurses, and even more importantly as CNLs, we work to affect change in these very complex systems, very complex healthcare systems. The domino effect in healthcare is much closer related to this domino setup, where one domino can literally affect change on the entire system. In a complex adaptive system, multiple organizations are interdependent on one another to truly survive. So, as we know, healthcare is made up of organizations that all simultaneously work both independently but also together. These images display examples of that complexity. From the left, it can be seen that the emergency room serves the general public and a variety of stakeholders are present. Now, take a look and write down a few of the complexities that you see from each of these images. One thing that I'd really like to draw your attention to specifically is that in the center picture, not one of the physicians are even looking at the patient. This is an area where nurses, and specifically CNLs, have the opportunity to thrive in healthcare. So take a moment and jot down your ideas before you move on. So in order to thrive in this setting, in a complex adaptive system, it's important to understand the components that make those systems up. The main characteristics of a complex adaptive system are multiple diverse agents, new behaviors, ideas and patterns that are frequently emerging, and naturally, results that are nonlinear and are unpredictable. The very important thing that needs to be addressed is that a complex adaptive system cannot be run with traditional leadership. It requires an understanding of the interactions that occur within these very complex systems. So it requires complexity leadership, which clinical nurse leaders are trained to be good at, trained to understand things from a unit perspective and from a perspective that goes beyond the unit. For those of you that are like me, I'm a little bit more visual, so this is an image of the same thing. This is an image of a complex adaptive system. As you can see at the top, multiple diverse agents. They're independent but also interdependent on one another. You can see in the center, there's a bunch of new ideas, patterns, instructions that are all forming, and there are relationships that exist among multiple organizational levels. Below that, you can see that there are a variety of leaders, all equally important but different within the system. And at the very bottom, there's a personal experience of health, which that shows results that are nonlinear and are constantly changing. So the reason that complex adaptive systems are so imperative to understand is that as nursing leaders in this highly complex system, we have to have true self-awareness and understand that our actions will impact a greater system, but also have the power to truly transform care. Understanding the complex system is not only for the purpose of leading it, but rather it involves being able to see the system as a whole, which is both radical and transformational in comparison to the way that it has been viewed traditionally. So in today's complex medical system, nursing leaders need to understand complexity science, complexity leadership, and need to be personally aware of everything that's going on and interacting the system that they work within. So complexity leadership is not really just a new way to lead, but it's a radical and transformational way of viewing healthcare. Now, in order to really understand what resistance you might meet and to really understand what a complex adaptive system is, it's important, equally important, to talk about what change was like before the recognition that healthcare is a complex adaptive system. So prior to this, and even still, change in healthcare was viewed in a stepwise fashion, where only one issue was really fixed at a time. We now know that every time an issue arises, we can't reinvent the entire system over one broken part. So as clinical nurse leaders, we are challenged to adapt these systems that are already in place and to facilitate more effective healthcare without reinventing the wheel every single time. Now again, clinical nurse leaders are in the perfect position to do this because they understand accountability within a healthcare organization from both the unit level and from a larger system level. And additionally, as clinical nurse leaders, we've been taught to organize and apply evidence-based practice measures within our own microsystem. All right, so what we're going to do is we need to talk further about understanding change and understanding how clinical nurse leaders affect change. So what we're going to get into is 4 specific change theories that may appear on your CNL certification exam and will definitely be useful in your future clinical practice. These are theories that I actually utilize on my unit today. So the 4 theories that we are going to discuss are the theory of diffusion, Lewin's model, which is unfreezing, moving, and refreezing, a model called forming, storming, norming, and performing, and Kotter's 8-step change model. Okay, so the first theory is the theory of diffusion, and that is the idea that an idea or product gains momentum and spreads throughout a population over a period of time through awareness, a decision to adopt, and a continued use of innovation. So on the next 4 slides, the theory of diffusion is explained through the advances that have been made in caring for patients with HIV and AIDS. Now, much of the advancement can be attributed to nursing-driven research, education, leadership, policy development, and patient advocacy, or as I like to call it, nursing magic, because this type of work is often done behind the scenes and without great recognition. But as you can see, it is capable of making huge changes in our world. So this is a little bit more about the theory of diffusion. It's often used to accelerate the adoption of important public health programs like the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it involves a change of behavior in our social system. So this diffusion example that we are going through is when the HIV outbreak first began, most individuals that developed or were diagnosed with HIV had AIDS within 8 to 10 years, and once a person was diagnosed with AIDS, they had a 2-year life expectancy. So this is just a really powerful quote. You have no shorter life expectancy than someone without HIV now, and though different in nature, it is comparable to a chronic illness like diabetes. So how did that happen? This is kind of the story. So feel free to look through this on your own time, but from 1984 until now, nurses have done a lot of nursing magic, a lot of advocacy, a lot of policy, a lot of research to really try to break down what HIV/AIDS is, and they've taught people how to manage the disease process better. So this is that nursing magic I was talking about. The nurse serves as all of these roles simultaneously and at different times. So this is just more breaking down this exciting example. Essentially, for 30 years, the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care has been the largest HIV nursing professional organization. Nurses represent 80% of the global healthcare force and are often the sole care providers in many economically and geographically challenged locales. All right, so the next theory we're going to go over is Lewin's model of change, which suggests that with any change, resistance will be met, and recognizing that resistance is part of the process and it is essential to enacting any permanent change. So in this model, unfreezing represents the preparation for change itself. Then the change happens, and then a refreezing period allows for the change to become permanent. So a practical example of this model is healthcare's transition from paper to electronic medical records. Even today, resistance is met when it comes to the use of electronic medical records over paper records. Though this model of preparing for change, executing change, and ensuring that people are supported is effective in developing this new system, some resistance is met, and it is very important, as we know, for the people that have been part of an environment that use paper records to prepare staff for the resistance that they might feel and the resistance they might face when trying to create change in motion. All right, the same applies for this next video. If you see the white screen, it should pop up here. There is a hyperlink to it, but please watch Kotter's 8-step change model to understand it. It effectively explains the last theory that we're going to be discussing, which is Kotter's 8-step change model. This is a model that is frequently utilized and is mentioned in your text and will likely appear on the CNL exam. This is a visual representation for you to refer to on Kotter's 8-step change model, and it's for those of you who are like me, who tend to learn a little bit better through a visual representation. Okay, so the next 2 slides are just, all they are more questions for you. Please feel free to answer on your own. The answers are provided in the notes section at the bottom of your PowerPoint. And I think they actually, these bold on here so you know if you got the right answer. We're going to move on though. All right, so we are actually going to start wrapping up this lecture, but I'd like to just leave this open with a couple of final ideas and an explanation of the case study. Now, 3 of the very important things that we have to remember as CNLs is that our greatest strengths come from within. We have been taught how to change healthcare through horizontal leadership, and we have to model that behavior within ourselves. 2, the utilization of horizontal leadership can be our greatest asset. Going the road alone is impossible and truly impractical. So this is an image of how to lead successful change, and it's insights from senior executive leaders that is very applicable for clinical leaders. So essentially, it's important for you to change yourself first, to evaluate your own mindset, your actions, and your behaviors. Make sure you get people to go with you. Don't go it alone. And make sure you communicate the change and do it as a team. And always assess for a change that is faltering. Know your why for the change and be passionate enough to get it back on track. If you need or want more on discovering your why, this video is excellent, absolutely fantastic, and explains how many people have been able to do incredible things despite extraordinarily difficult circumstances. All right, so finally, we're going to be jumping into the explanation of the case studies. 2 case studies are presented here. There is a handout that should be available to you online. The object is for you to pick one of these scenarios and to walk through all of the competencies that can be utilized by clinical nurse leaders to effectuate change in the situation that is presented to you. Please see the handout that is provided to you online for further details. It's been my pleasure walking through each of this with you. I'm wishing each of you a good rest of the semester, both safety and health through this challenging time. And please don't hesitate if you have any questions or comments to reach out to me through the emails that are listed on this slide. Thank you.